We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Middle East attacks continue, a weakening job market, reining in government agencies, and more. Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin, and here's the news you need to know. The U.S. military fired another wave of ship and submarine-launched missile strikes against Houthi-controlled sites on Wednesday, according to U.S. Central Command, marking the fourth time in days it has directly targeted the group in Yemen as violence that ignited in the wake of the Israel-Hamas war continues to spill over in the Middle East. The strikes were launched from the Red Sea and hit 14 missiles that the command deemed an imminent threat. The strikes followed an official announcement Wednesday that the U.S. has put the Houthis back on its list of specially designated global terrorists. The sanctions that come with the formal designation are meant to sever violent extremist groups from their sources of financing. Biden removed the Houthis from the terrorist list early in his administration. Pakistan's Air Force launched airstrikes against alleged separatist camps in Iran early Thursday in retaliation for Iran's strike against a similar separatist militant group in Pakistan. Pakistan's attacks reportedly killed at least 9 people. Pakistan's foreign ministry said the precision military strikes against terrorist hideouts were launched based on credible intelligence of impending large-scale terrorist activities. The tit-for-tat airstrikes between the neighboring countries came as tensions rise in the Middle East. Iran also attacked targets in Iraq and Syria on Monday in response to an Islamic State suicide bombing that killed more than 90 people in early January. The two nations were careful to say that they had only targeted their own nationals in the tit-for-tat strikes, an indication that neither country wants the situation to spiral, experts said. But risks of a miscalculation remain amid heightened tensions in the Middle East. A shipment of medicine and other supplies for Hamas-held hostages and Palestinian civilians arrived in Gaza on Wednesday under a deal mediated by France and Qatar. The agreement was the first between Israel and Hamas since a week-long ceasefire in November. The 5 trucks were allowed to cross into Gaza after undergoing security checks by Israel. The shipment included medicine for Israeli hostages, many of whom have chronic conditions requiring prescription drugs, who have been held by Hamas since its militants attacked on October 7th. A senior Hamas official said the shipment included 1,000 boxes of medicine for Palestinians for every box intended for the hostages. More than a dozen Democrats in the House of Representatives joined Republicans to formally rebuke President Biden over his border and immigration policies on Wednesday. Lawmakers passed a bipartisan resolution denouncing the Biden administration's open border policies, condemning the national security and public safety crisis along the southwest border, and urging President Biden to end his administration's open border policies. It's a largely symbolic move, but a pointed message from the House as talks are underway between the Senate and White House on a border security compromise in exchange for Republican support for sending Ukraine more aid. A White House meeting with congressional leaders revived hopes for a deal combining tighter border security with aid for Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Senate will focus on passing legislation funding the government to avoid a partial government shutdown Friday. There were signs that the labor market was cooling in nearly all regions of the country, according to a Federal Reserve survey released Wednesday. The survey, known as the Beige Book, is a collection of anecdotes from business contacts collected before January 8th. The context spoke of larger applicant pools, lower turnover rates, more selective hiring by firms, and easing wage pressures. Cooling wages in particular would help keep inflation on a downward path. Fed officials will meet at the end of the month to plot interest rate policy. They used the Beige Book to get a sense of conditions on the ground. The business context seemed optimistic about future growth. Expectations were positive, had improved, or both, the survey found. There were also many reports that consumers' price sensitivity was forcing retailers to narrow their profit margins and put pressure on their own suppliers to keep prices contained. Members of the Supreme Court's conservative majority asked questions Wednesday suggesting they might limit or overturn a 1984 precedent that has protected the regulatory power of federal agencies, frustrating business groups. Conservative justices pressed Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar to justify the so-called Chevron deference, which instructs courts to defer to federal agencies' interpretation of laws that could have multiple meanings. The precedent has bolstered the ability of presidential administrations to regulate everything from artificial intelligence to cryptocurrency to environmental protections. Prelogar said overturning the doctrine would cause unwarranted shock to the legal system. Justice Brett Kavanaugh said Chevron itself ushers in shocks to the system with every new administration. Political independents continue to constitute the largest political bloc in the U.S., with an average of 43% of U.S. adults identifying as independents in 2023, tying the record high from 2014. Independent identification has been 40% or higher each year since 2011, except for during the 2016 and 2020 presidential election years. Equal 27% shares of U.S. adults identify as Republicans and Democrats, with the Democratic figure marking a new low for that party in Gallup's trend. Independents first outnumbered supporters of both major political parties in 1991 and have continued to do so since then, except in several years between 2004 and 2008. Over time, the increase in the percentage of independents has come more at the expense of Democrats than Republicans, which might be expected since Democrats were previously the largest political group. That's the Raw Naked Truth. You can catch every episode of The Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.